Welcome to Getting Real to Heal with Dr. Grace. I am Dr. Grace English, founder of Deep in the Heart Ministries. We are a ministry that exists to tackle the hard realities of this life through the power of Jesus Christ. He is the only one that can set us free from our addictions, our negative thoughts and emotions, and bring us the true lasting healing and peace that He wants for our lives. Welcome to Getting Real to Heal with Dr. Grace. Today's topic is when life throws you the unexpected, choose hope. Insight from a stroke survivor. As you know, most things in life we are not in control of, but we do have a choice on how we respond to it. Since Adam and Eve sinned in the Garden of Eden, the world has been a messy place. And death and disease, they happen on this side of heaven. But we know that there is a Jesus that can walk with us in the trials and the difficulties of this life. Today, I have a dear friend, Lori Vober, who I had just recently met, and I know her from our Christian Communicators Conference Sisterhood, and she is a stroke survivor. She had a hemorrhagic stroke at the age of 29, and today she is going to share her story with all of us. Lori, for the first time I got to meet her, she came to Tyler, Texas this April. She came to the Deep in the Heart Women's Conference, and it was purely a delight, Lori, to see you there. And so I really appreciate that. So welcome to the show, Lori.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yes. And before I have Lori share her story, just want to let y'all know she is a motivational speaker, writer, and author. And she lives in Goodyear, Arizona with her husband, Dennis, and they were able to adopt a sibling group of 3 in 2011. And so her kids' names are Angie, Ingrid, and Juan. And the girls are married and they have 3 grandchildren. And they have one that is expected in December. So congratulations. And
Thank you.
so Lori, so share with us where and what you were doing when at the age of 29 when all of this started.
Yes, thank you. Life changes in the moment, in the blink of a moment, and that's what we found out. So my background is sales, marketing, and customer support. I was working for the airlines at the time, and my husband, Danis, and I had been trying for about 2 years at that point to start our family. We lived in Minnesota, and we were not successful at that point. And I really just thought it was stress oriented. He was an aircraft mechanic, working second shift. I was normal business hours, traveling a lot, working with travel agents. And I was also the wedding coordinator and event planner for our church. So at that point, our church came to us and asked if I wanted to change my career and be their office manager. And I thought that would be a great opportunity to slow life down a little bit and start our family. And it was 3 weeks into that job that I had this hemorrhagic stroke. And so I often say now, our plans aren't our plans. And God literally not allowed me to take that job for family planning, but really saved my life.
Wow, wow. So you were only 29 years old. And so the stroke, did it leave any neurological deficits, Lori?
It did, it did. And I am so thankful that the stroke happened when it did and where it did, and that I was happily married. We're almost 5 years into our marriage. And it was caused by a birth defect. So it could have happened any time in my entire life. So I had so many amazing opportunities through college. We took trips overseas. So, God in His grace gave me so many experiences up until then. And I did have quite a few deficits and still do today, as you know, when you met me.
Mhm.
I was woke up after a 17-day drug-induced coma, completely paralyzed on the left side. I still have physical disability today. Left arm and hand mobility issues and walking disability. Cognitively, sometimes in memory, I can see that as I progress, but God has given me such an amazing sense of independence and mobility. Statistically, only 20% of hemorrhagic stroke survivors technically live an independent life. And so I am so grateful that he has allowed me to surpass that statistic.
Oh my gosh, Lori, you are a walking miracle. And to
I
see
am.
the joy that you have and the gratefulness that you have in your heart for when the Lord, allowed that to happen in your life, you were able to experience things before that. You got married, y'all
Mhm.
were, working your early careers. And so, but when you actually had that stroke, did you go through a period where you were angry at the Lord for what had happened to you? It sounded like you were a believer at the time
I was a
already.
believer, and I'm
Mhm.
so thankful for that. I grew up in a Methodist and Presbyterian background, but I actually became a Christian my senior year of high school. My church was associated, well, right across the street from our high school. It was a Baptist church, and that's when I first really got the message that it was a personal relationship and accepted Christ at that point. And so I'm so grateful
So,
that I was already walking with the Lord. To be
yes.
angry, no, actually, I really wasn't because, when the stroke happened, I really think it's the grace of God that emotionally protected me from every going, emotionally in the wrong direction.
Mhm.
I really thought that if I just exercised a lot and we kept with the game plan of exercise and therapy, I would conquer this and get a full recovery. And so I'm really good with plans and um, as long as there's a controlled plan in place, I was good with it. And I always like to exercise prior. So in my mind, this was just another exercise plan. And God, I think, really protected
Hmm.
me um, mentally and emotionally. However, I have to say, we're going on 22 years now. That was back in 2003 that I had this stroke.
Mhm.
I have learned so much about stroke recovery and the physical elements, which most of stroke recovery is built on the physical, versus the emotional and mental support that we need as survivors. And I am much more aware of myself and other survivors and what we need emotionally that sometimes gets put on the side burner just because our physical issues are so great.
Right.
Many times we don't address, I don't think, in the healthcare industry, the emotional and mental. And when we don't get back what our hearts desire physically, which I haven't,
Mhm.
if we're not healthy mentally and emotionally, that is when the anger and the stuckedness comes in. And so I think that's super important.
Right. Lori, I have seen as an internal medicine physician, most of my patients who've had strokes, they're typically obviously 70s and 80s. But I have seen that in addition to what you said, obviously the neurological deficits that they may struggle with, but it's the emotional and the psychological and the spiritual aspect that cannot be ignored. I have seen many dive into a deep depression from a previous stroke, and their family members, they don't understand what is happening. And so I'm so glad that you brought that up because that is a whole part of who we are. And
It is.
so you're left with this, huge change in your life and you're not mobile or, whatever your deficits are. And but you can't just focus on the physical and just say, "Okay, rehab, you're gonna get better." Oh, you're missing the whole picture there.
Yes. It's very similar to, God and his whole doctrine of unity, what scripture says about the body. And, we're not supposed to focus on one limb. It's the whole body. And,
Yes.
therapy in general is trained. Therapists are trained to look at one particular part of the body, either the arm or the leg or your gait or your balance. That's just how they're trained. They're not trained in psychotherapy. And that
Right.
leaves us as survivors at a great loss. And I'm, again, at 22 years going through the same battle as my survivors and trying to help them and help myself. So I appreciate you helping me address this because it is it's puzzling and it's hard to find the help we need. But, for those listening, if you're in, whether it's a stroke or another medical challenge,
Mhm.
um, you know, there there's support out there, and just fight for the people that will give you the correct support. And I've learned so much about being my own best patient advocate.
Right. And I'm so glad you said that, Lori, because, this podcast is, entitled Getting Real to Heal. And what this title is aiming at is, let's talk about how things really are going on in your life. Let's get honest with the
Yeah,
Lord. Let's get honest with ourselves. Get honest with the people around us and not hide and pretend that everything is okay. Because
absolutely.
if you don't allow those feelings and thoughts to be expressed, it's going to be internalized and it's only going to lead to harm. And so,
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm so grateful that
mhm,
you chose to do this podcast, and that you're choosing to allow us an area that we can be vulnerable. I was not vulnerable for a very long time because of my age. When I had my
mhm,
stroke, I thought vulnerability would deplete my ability to have friends. And my thought process was, if I just persevere and quickly get better as quick as I can, I'll just fit back into my peer group and my life will pick back up. But it doesn't work that way. And
right,
I was taught by some dear friends uh, uh, through their own medical journey that vulnerability is not only a key to our own healing, but it's a key to support, it's a key to connection to other people, and it's a key to allow other people to also be vulnerable about what they're going through.
right, right. I so appreciate that. I mean, it sounds like we all struggle. When I was diagnosed with breast cancer last year, that was the last thing I thought I was gonna ever have, but the Lord knew it was coming. He was
Yeah.
prepared. He was preparing me, and so He has taught me so much, Lori, just through this cancer journey. Things that I've not the things new things that I've learned about him and about myself, and there's no other way that I would have learned it unless I had gone through this cancer journey.
Absolutely. Yes.
And
Yes.
so, likewise, with the stroke, you've been living 22 years now with the stroke. And so, I know that you ended up having seizures from as complications from the stroke as well, and you have to take seizure medications.
That's correct. That's correct. So my neurologist in Minnesota uh, took me off my seizure medicine when we moved from Minnesota to Arizona. 2 months after hospital discharge, unfortunately, my husband lost his job due to the downturn in the aviation industry from September 11th, and that's what caused us to move.
Mhm.
And I was having no signs of seizures, so he took me off my medicine. And the first day without medicine, my brain started interacting with the blood deposits in the scar tissue, causing my first massive seizure. And unfortunately, it went from a 30-second stare to 8-minute convulsive seizures before we finally got him under control. It took about 2 years to find a medicine and the right dosage to actually control them. And so I have to say, God gives us so many challenges, and every challenge can become an opportunity. And I've learned
Mhm.
so much. I think for me, the epilepsy was harder than the stroke, because the stroke, I thought, well, I'll just exercise and get over this. But the epilepsy, there's no control. And so for
Right.
those that are epileptic their entire life, I just have such a heart for them, because it is such a difficult disease when you don't have control over your body, and
Mhm.
you don't have control over what might happen. So I'm grateful mine are now under control, and I know what to do. And but it's always in the back of your mind, and it's always something your family
Right.
um, has to worry about. And so
Right.
um,
Right. Well, it sounds like Dennis, he has just been a rock for you.
he
Very
has he
supportive. He's been there from day one, and you're so fortunate to have that. And so,
I am. And God has a plan. Again, it goes back to God has an amazing plan for everything. We met when I moved to Minnesota. I moved to Minnesota for my career, which was actually in the petroleum industry originally.
Mhm.
And the joke of it between Danis and I is I did not like Minnesota when I first moved there. I'm from Texas, and so I had never seen that much snow in my entire life. So when the company moved me to Minnesota, it was January of '97, and so I thought, oh my goodness, how am I ever going to live in this much snow? And after only dating, officially dating 6 weeks, he knew
Uh-huh.
I was about to move home to Texas when he thought, well, I have a choice to make. I'm going to ask her to marry me and see if she'll stay, or I might lose her. And so he did. But his mom had actually just passed away from a
Mm,
13-year battle of cancer herself. And so I think
okay.
God prepared him his entire life to take care of me because he watched his dad take care of his mom pretty much his entire life. So God always
Wow.
has his own plan.
Yes, 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 yes. So that is one of your life verses, that you had
It is
shared with me. And so Proverbs 19:21, many are the plans in a person's heart, but it is the Lord's purpose that prevails. And so many times we try to map out what we want to do in our life, but then we realize we really aren't in control. And
absolutely.
but like I shared, the Lord is always a few steps ahead of us. He knows what is coming. He is going to be there for us. And He wants us just to hang on to Him and keep praying and keep seeking and keep listening and keep asking, Lord, you are in control. What are your plans for me? And trust in Him.
I agree. I agree. And there's so many times none of us would ask for these challenges. However, it truly is our chance to grow closer to Him and depend on God for our strength and to grow us. And I would not
Yes.
be on the same journey as I am today had I not gone through all that I've gone through, both as a stroke survivor, as an epileptic, as an adoptive mom,
Right.
every single thing that I have gone through that life has thrown my way has
Mhm.
drawn me closer to God and given me new and greater opportunities. And
Mhm.
it definitely was never in my thoughts or plans to be an author or a speaker. That was the farthest thing from my mind. But he will turn anything we go through around if we keep our eyes on him. And that's the biggest thing I've learned is, till he calls us home,
Mhm.
we have one job, and that is to serve him and serve
Mhm.
others to our best ability.
Mhm. And He gets the glory. So it's all pointing to
Absolutely.
Jesus. And so your story just exemplifies the Romans 8:28. It's one of my favorite verses. And we know that in all things God call works for the good for those who love him according to his purpose. It's all things. He is working for our good. So even in the bad things that we encounter in this life, he can use it for good and use it for his purposes. And it's absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, thank you. And it's not all flowers and rainbows. We know that, and there are
Mhm.
hard days, and there are hard challenges, and we're not
Mhm.
always happy. And my husband and I, we have a fabulous marriage. We're going on 27 years now. But there's no special favors. I mean, we get mad at each other like any other couple. We laugh like
Right.
any other couple. We cry like any other couple. We yell at each other like any other couple. And, that's the way it should be. And I think, one of your questions to me was, for other caregivers and other family members, us as
Mhm.
survivors, honestly, that's what we want. We want to feel just like anybody else. And so, although it's really hard sometimes for the caregivers to get to that point, especially if it's your spouse.
Mhm.
Really, that's what we want. We just want our spouses back, and we want our old life to be as normal as possible. We
Mhm.
don't really want to be overly protected. We don't want to be bubble wrapped and lived in a bubble, whether
Mhm.
it's a
Mhm.
cancer journey or a stroke journey
Mhm.
or a diabetic journey or whatever our medical
Mhm.
challenge has been. We just want to be treated like we were before that challenge. And the caregiver needs to make sure they're taking care of themselves and giving
Yes.
themselves the soul care and the rest they need also.
Right. I know many times the caregiver is the one that we worry about because we see how much they are carrying on themselves to care for their loved one, and so I know that you speak to several stroke survivor groups monthly. And
Yeah.
so, how do you encourage these stroke survivors and their families?
Yes, thank you for mentioning that.
Mhm.
I do, and I'm so glad that I've been able to start doing that more. I think one of the things is I just let them know that they're not alone. Number one, because I never had that when I was going through it. I don't know that it existed as much or that I knew
Mhm.
about it. And number two, that if I encourage them if they have a set of friends that don't understand what they're going through, not to necessarily discount those friends. um, it's just that they have to understand not everybody understands, um, and will understand. And so they just
Mhm.
need to go and find friends that are going to support them. In 2022, when my first book was coming out, I was pre-diagnosed ovarian cancer, and thankfully I'm cancer free. But that opened a whole new door for me to have some amazing cancer fighting friends, and that was the first time I found a group that I felt like they understood me and I understood them. And so I just tell
Mm.
my stroke community to just keep walking the walk and talking to as many people as they need to until they feel like they're heard and they
Mhm.
know that they're not alone.
Mhm. Mhm. Yes. It's coming to mind. I do have a patient that recently she had a pretty significant stroke and she was fully functional before. And I remember just having to talk with her mom and her herself and just all the adaptations that she would have to go through and all the different medications that now she was taking, some for life. And I could just see just that uncertainty of like, "Oh my gosh, what is my life gonna be like?" You know? And so, thankfully, she has done better, she's recovering, she's getting more independent, but it does take time,
It does.
and
It does.
and you
And
do
I
have to reach out to people who can understand where you're at.
And I
And
do think it's important for those of us who are survivors to understand, and it's taken me a long time to get to this point, for us to be patient with our family members. When we've lost our independence, it's so hard. I was super independent, and it's hard for me to rely on other people. But
mm,
our family members, when we were in our state of we all go through different things. For me, I was in a coma for 17 days. And while I was asleep, my family was there watching and wondering if I was going to make it or not. And
mm,
so I didn't live that. And they are the ones that had to live through that trauma. And so
mhm,
when I'm impatient with them, and frustrated of their protection, I didn't have to live through the trauma of watching that and knowing my spouse or my daughter and my mom's
right,
case would go through that. So I think sometimes on the survivor standpoint, we just have to be a little more patient with what we still want and what we yearn for, with our
mhm,
family members, and we have to be very respectful. I was from the generation that you're very respectful for what your parents want, and so one of the things is they really are worried for my driving on the highway. And so when I have a doctor's appointment or an engagement that's far away, I ask for their help or friends' help if
mhm,
it's on a highway, just because I know I can drive the highway. and I'm comfortable, but they're
Mhm.
not comfortable with other people around me or what could happen. So I'm like, you know what?
Right.
If that's going to make everybody happier, then I can ask for help. So I think these little things that even though we want to be independent, what is it going to hurt in the long run for us to ask for help or for us just to back away from and look at the whole picture?
And it's so
So,
true. When I got diagnosed with cancer, and I'm sure you're the same way, when you had your stroke, you are helpless and people just come out of the woodwork. They want to do something for you. And so you think, you're the one usually helping people, not receiving the help. And so the Lord had just taught me, let your pride down. These people are loving you through what they're wanting to do for you. Allow them to do that. And when I did that, it was such a blessing, Lori, such a huge blessing, you know?
oh, that's so good.
It's so, but, and that, yeah. And I know the stroke had also, there were some dreams, I think, that you had to let go because of the stroke. You weren't able to have your own children biologically, but the Lord still allowed y'all to be parents and adopt, your three kids. And so you were still able to live out that dream, even though
There's a lot of
physically.
things.
Hmm.
Yep. And there's a lot of things that a lot of people go through that we all have dreams that some come to fruition and some don't. And
Hmm.
it's truly just a matter of moving forward. And I appreciate you mentioning that because that goes back to the emotional and mental health. Some we talk a lot in terms of grief when someone loses someone and someone passes away. And I think our society has a hard time supporting loved ones and friends when they've lost someone. We don't know how to react and
Hmm.
how to help someone that's grieving in that way. But
Hmm.
there's grief in a medical challenge just the same, and we don't know how to react ourselves, and friends and family members don't know how to support a grieving loved one through a medical challenge. And the
Hmm.
grief is still there, and so many times we just forget to grieve. And
Hmm.
I definitely did not grieve my loss of infertility. I didn't grieve my loss of
Mm,
life, of what
mm,
I could have had or wanted to have. I just kept going like the
right.
Energizer Bunny, and I just never stopped. And busyness became one of my coping and healing mechanisms. And you have to stop at some point and grieve
You
that loss,
do.
just like you would grieve your loved one.
Right.
You
Right.
you did lose something, so take that
Mhm.
time to grieve before you can
Mhm.
go on, and you will have a new normal and a new better life. God will make a new journey for you, but if you don't
Right.
rectify those feelings, there's going to be a
Right.
stumbling block.
Right. Right. So true. So true. So, Lori, tell us about the book that won an award. Choices.
Yes, yes. So this is it's called Choices. When you're faced with a challenge, what choice will you make? And it was my first book that came out in 2022, and I'm really happy that I was able to write it because it's not only about my stroke, it's about our adoption, about parenting, homeschool, but I also put reflection questions at the end of each chapter. So it's not just my story, it's the reader's journey also for you to reflect on what you've gone through and what you're going through as you're reading about my journey.
Yes, yes. And I've actually read the book and I loved your book. And yes, I highly recommend it. And the listeners can contact you at your website, lorivober.com, and they can purchase your book off their website, as well as
Yes,
off Amazon as well.
yes, absolutely. And if they do sign up for my monthly newsletter right there on my website, they will get chapter one of Choices as a complimentary gift.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. So, thank you so much, Lori, for just allowing the Lord to use your story. None of us would have picked having a stroke at 29, how how we would know how that would change our lives. But Lori, I just see the joy of the Lord in you and how much He's grown you through that, all of this, and the impact that you're making, and for the hundreds of families, stroke victims and their families, and encouraging them, and now with their cancer patients that the Lord has kind of put into your arena, to minister, which is absolutely wonderful. And so, thank you for showing us that we can choose to rise up to the challenges that we face in this life and to use them as opportunities for growth and to share hope with others, that we can hang on and trust Jesus even in the darkest of times, that He is there to help us and He is going to have us get through it. And we are just, all He wants is for us just to stay close to Him and just to trust Him and trust in the plans that He has for our lives. And so, you are such an inspiration, Lori. Thank you so much
Oh,
for being on the show today. I really appreciate you.
oh, thank you. Thank you so much for having me on. It's a blessing to get to know you better and blessing to be here. Thank you.
Yes, yes. So, so thank you, listeners, for tuning in today to today's episode of Getting Real to Heal with Dr. Grace. We will see you the next time. This podcast is made possible only through our generous donors. So if you liked what you heard today and you want these Jesus stories to go out into the world, please consider giving to deepintheheartministries.com. You can also get a hold of me at grace@drgraceenglish.com.